Okay, good day to everyone. Good evening to those of you in Israel, and good afternoon to those of you in North America or Europe. Welcome to the third in this webinar series. My name is Paul Gross. I'm a senior fellow here at the Menachem Begin Heritage Center in Jerusalem. This webinar series is a special series that the center is doing in partnership with the Hidden Light Institute in the United States. It's a series which leads up to a special symposium on the life and legacy of Menachem Begin, which we hope, COVID allowing, will take place here at the Begin Center in May of this year. If not, we will make alternative arrangements for a virtual event. And there will also be the premiere screening then of Upheaval, the new feature-length documentary in English about Menachem Begin, produced by our partners, the Hidden Light Institute, which is a newish educational institution in the United States, which is teaching about Israeli and Jewish leadership, and is at the moment focused very much on this project of promoting the example of leadership offered by Israel's sixth Prime Minister, Menachem Begin. Before I introduce the webinar for today and our speakers, I do want to make reference at least to the fact that today, the 27th of January, is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. I'm sure many of you will have already watched or heard or read something that marks the occasion. Here on this series, we're following the Jewish calendar, which has its own Holocaust Remembrance Day, Yom HaShoah, in about 3 months' time. And today our event is inspired by the holiday of Tu B'Shvat, which has begun already here in Israel as the sun has set here. And I can tell you that we will discuss the events of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, in a later date. In fact, the next webinar that we have, the Holocaust will be a central part of the discussion around Menachem Begin's decision to bomb the nuclear reactor in Iraq, which is our webinar in a couple of weeks' time. But to our webinar for today, before I introduce our speakers, let me just say that the format this is going to take is, after I hand over to our moderator and speakers, he will ask them some questions. There'll be discussion between them, and after that there'll be an opportunity for your questions to be answered. You can write those questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. You'll see Q&A written at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can write those in at any point, and at the end of the presentations I will read out some of those for our experts. Okay, to our experts, we're going to hear from really top experts in the fields we're going to be discussing today. We're going to hear from Dr. Clive Lipchin, who's the director of the Arava Institute for Environmental Studies Center for Transboundary Water Management, where he oversees research and development projects, workshops, and conferences that focus on water and environmental problems facing Israel, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority. Clive has conducted research for a number of international water agencies such as the World Bank, the EU, the UNDP, and USAID, and he's been involved most recently with the EU's Water Initiative for the Mediterranean region and the USAID Conflict Management and Mitigation Program and the Middle East Regional Cooperation Program. Clive is originally from South Africa. He's been living in Israel for over 20 years. He has a master's degree in desert ecology from Ben Gurion University of the Negev and a PhD in resource and ecology management from the School of Nature Resources and Environment at the University of Michigan. We'll also be hearing from Yaron Locher, the CEO of Telecommunications Limited, an Israeli company that specializes in IoT solutions for water utilities. Yaron has more than 30 years of experience managing complex multidiscipline R&D projects, product development, and operations. As managing director of Miltel, Yaron has acquired unique expertise and experience in wireless telemetry, AMR, AMI systems, advanced water management, and smart city solutions. I don't know what all those things are, but he can explain them, I'm sure. Yaron was born in Israel. He's a graduate of the IDF's Academic Reserve Program. He graduated from the joint Boston University and Ben Gurion University program, where he received an MSc in management summa cum laude with the Dean's Award for highest GPA graduate. He served in the IDF Intelligence Corps for more than 13 years in various professional and managerial positions within the technological R&D unit. And in his last position, he was second in command of the division in charge of operations and human resource of an elite R&D unit with more than 1,000 scientists and engineers. Many of you will have read or know of Startup Nation and the whole Israeli phenomenon of the IDF being this training ground for Israel's technological miracle, really. We also have joining us from the Israel Economic Mission in New York, where he is the Director of Business Development, Jacob Asiri, who's responsible for bridging Israeli and American business stakeholders across water, energy, food tech, real estate, and advanced manufacturing industries. Jacob is a graduate of Harvard Business School, where he studied management, economics, and investment strategies. And last but by no means least, tying all of this together, our moderator, Bernard Haston, the chair of the board of the Hidden Light Institute, in addition to having strong family connections to the Begin Center and also being highly involved in the Jewish community of Indianapolis. Bernard's day job is as the president and owner of SpeedRead Technologies LLC, the exclusive USA distributor for an Israeli-made fully automated meter reading technology for water, gas, and electric sub-metering applications. He also has many years of experience in banking, real estate management, and is a licensed attorney. With that, I'm going to hand over to Bernard Haston. Thank you, Bernard.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it. Good afternoon and evening to everyone watching from around the world. It is an honor to be chair of the Hidden Light Institute, an organization that has made and produced the first English language documentary on the life of Menachem Begin. We are equally proud of our partnership to present the Begin Symposium and webinar series. Before we delve into the subject matter at hand, I'd like to bring up my personal connection with Menachem Begin and his legacy. My father, Hart Haston, is the oldest living American friend of Menachem Begin. I'm lucky enough to say that Prime Minister Begin came to our home in Indianapolis 3 times, and the final time was in March of 1976 for the bris of my brother, Josh. Josh, I'm giving you a shout out. Menachem Begin was my brother's sandik, or godfather, for his bris. My parents shared a close relationship with Menachem and Eliza Begin and the Begin families, and they have wonderful memories about his visits and their conversations related to Israel and the Jewish people at large. As we've mentioned in our past webinars, the subject matter covered in our programs may not be specifically about Menachem Begin, but do relate to the impact of his policies. While Begin was not a specialist in water, he played a key role in areas which relates to the topic we will be addressing today. Begin believed in capitalism. He was very much a proponent of the free market as part of his general belief in individual liberty. Upon his election as prime minister in 1977, he overturned 30 years of socialist policy and opened up the Israeli economy to private enterprise and entrepreneurship. Today, as we know, Israel is known as the startup nation. Globally, we have seen Israel take its place as a country made up of innovators moving at speeds that most countries cannot compete with. That all began with Menachem Begin's economic revolution. Today, our focus is on water and technology. Water is a necessity regardless of where you are located in the world, and the technology being developed in Israel is making water accessible for all a reality. More than just the technology being developed, systems are being put in place that positively affect our environment and in turn assist in maintaining a strong economic standing with the ability to save water, reuse water, and importantly, monitor the water use. For Israel, water is a matter of national security and a diplomatic tool. Begin knew all too well that the importance of water to this country. He knew that private sector initiatives and funding was key to a successful economy. Thus, the startup nation began with the prime ministership of Menachem Begin. Before we begin our conversation with the panelists, We would like to play a short clip from the documentary Sustainable Nation. You might notice one of our panelists, Dr. Clive Lipshin from the Arava Institute, is in this clip. We look forward to hearing more from Dr. Lipshin about the Institute's efforts during our panel discussion. Paul, feel free to go ahead and start the clip.
So a woman has to walk around 8 kilometers to look for water here. And she's carrying a baby on her back, a 20-liter jerrycan. And she doesn't even need only one jerrycan. She needs at least 4 jerrycans a day.
India is facing severe water problems. There is no quality water available.
All year round, you see here mainly running sewage. Along this drain, there are 6 to 8 million people living in this area. Pouring the sewage into this drain, drinking from the water that's being affected by this drain.
California's in the middle of a drought. This is one of the longest ones we've been in, and it's been one of the most severe. I'm third generation of the whole farming family with the way the drought's going. There may not be a farm for my son, you know, in 20 years, we don't know. We need to be able to all come together for the greater good of society in general, to where we can all be sustainable.
20 years ago, Israel was in a water crisis. Today we have a surplus of water.
יש לנו את האמצעים, יש לנו את האנשים, ויש לנו את הרצון הטוב לפתור בעיות כמו התחממות עולמית, כמו התייבשות. זה באמת בידיים שלנו, והטכנולוגיה מאפשרת את זה.
I feel like our modest contribution is taking the innovations and being able to share it and help people.
אנחנו לוקחים את הפולס של העץ, ובאמצעות מכשור טכנולוגי, לתרגם אותה לנו.
Imagine that you stand on the road over there and see over here beautiful park. People can come here and sit inside the park that actually clean your water in the same time.
9,000 people are going to have clean water all year, all the time. They will not be searching for water anymore. It's the beginning of a new generation.
Great clip, Paul. Thanks very much. So what I want to do next is start with some questions to our panelists. And I wanted to start with Yaroom Locker. Yaroom, can you discuss some of the existing and emerging water technologies being introduced by Israeli partnerships? And what do they do and how are they impacting both the environment and economy of those who utilize them?
Thank you, Bernard. Good evening to everyone. It's really a great opportunity to be with you. It's a little bit different than usual when we're in front of an audience because I really can't see anyone that's with us, but I really appreciate everyone joining. I want to tell you a little bit about the water technologies in Israel, and then give a few examples of things that are happening with Israeli technologies for water around the world. So I think that 60 years ago, Israel was known mostly for its oranges. Everyone was familiar with the Jaffa brand. Then I think 20 years later, Israel became one of the world leading diamond centers. About 2 decades ago, Israel conquered the world with, I think, a unique position as a startup nation, which everyone still quotes, I mean, because it's an ongoing phenomena. For many years, Israeli companies have developed state-of-the-art irrigation technologies. I think that more than 50 years ago, the Tafib invented drip irrigation. It was a unique concept. Before that, you know, irrigation and water was just pipes and pumps. After they came forward with that, I think quick to follow were Nan and Dan. All 3 of these companies were kibbutz-based companies that introduced the modern irrigation technologies to the whole world. But it took, I think, 40 more years, and suddenly, I think, sometime 10 years ago, without even noticing this, Israel has become the world leader in water-related technologies. I think as such, the Israeli Water Conference, for example, has become mecca, I think, of the water industry. So Israel is really dominating the world with water technologies. Israeli companies are involved in many different areas related to water, including water desalination, filtration, purification, water security, water measuring and monitoring, control valves, quality technologies, analytical software. I mean, there are so many different areas I can't even list in water, wastewater infrastructure. And there are, I suppose, dozens of companies, if not hundreds. Many countries around the world are approaching Israel for training and support. These dozens or hundreds of Israeli companies and technologies out there, some of which have reached significant achievements. The list is so long that I can't mention even, I think, a fraction of them, but I want to give maybe two examples that will just give some light on how these things are happening. And one company I want to mention is Watergen. It's a company that's getting a lot of attention recently. Watergen's technology uses a series of filters to purify the air, take out the humidity and transform it into clean drinking water. It sounds like something incredible. It's like a machine that makes energy. Watergen has been selected by Times Magazine, I think, as the best innovation for 2019. And just recently, a few months ago, maybe I think last month or the end of last year, Watergen was selected. It was provided, I think, the CES Innovation Award. So there's a lot of buzz around this company, and I'm sure we'll hear about them in the future. I wanted to tell you about the company that I'm managing, Telecommunications. That's a company that is in the area of software, hardware, and communication systems. Our most successful product line is a system for advanced water meter reading. Maybe that sounds like something very strange, but actually what this is, these are systems that allow to collect water consumption information remotely, almost on an hourly basis. So it's not just about saving the time and effort of sending someone to read the meter. It's a lot more than that. It's what we maybe call today as a true water IoT solution. I think we've been involved in the IoT years before anyone even knew that it was going to be called IoT, but we actually invented this as we developed the product. And for the past 15 years, we've partnered with Speedway Technologies from Indiana, the company that is managed by Bernard Haston. Together, we've installed more than 2,000 submetering sites with more than 500,000 water meters connected just in North America for submetering. Submetering is the area where water is provided by the utility to private properties such as condominiums, apartment buildings, shopping centers, marinas. And when the utility provides that water, they just send one bill to the property owner, to the management company, and then they have to take care of how to allocate the cost of the water to all of the residents or to all of the companies involved or entities involved. Our technology allows them to actually, first of all, make billing very, very easy, straightforward. At a push of a button, they get the information and then it goes directly into the billing systems. But it does much more than that. The impact of these systems on water conservation is really unique. It starts with the awareness of the fact that people know how much water they're consuming. Then it allows us also to provide people with alerts or alarms, warnings when they have a leak inside their house. For example, if they have a running toilet, within less than 48 hours, in most cases within 24 hours, we're able to call them up and say, you have a leak in your apartment. I mean, that's something unique. Here in Israel, we have, I think, something like 200,000 meters connected. And on a daily basis, our customers send out hundreds, if not thousands of warnings, of SMS messages or emails to customers telling them that they've identified a leak in their property way before they even are aware of the fact that this has happened. I'm not talking about the fact that they save the customers a lot of money, but it also saves the utility a lot of headache of just managing those events. So there are a lot of different aspects. I'll just tell you a funny story that I remember. This is probably more than 10 years ago. One of the first systems that we installed in the US for private property, and the system was installed in I think an apartment complex with 200 apartments. And the day after the system was installed, our technicians went through the site and they did a review, like an audit, to make sure that the readings were correct, everything was fine. And they're walking through the apartments, and a lady opens the door, a very old lady, and she says, "Is it true that now I have to pay my bill based on what I'm using?" I said, "Yes, absolutely." She said, "Wait a second, guys, you have to come in." And she invites them into her house. She takes them to the bedroom, and then she has a small bathroom with a toilet there. She opens the door and the water is running, flushing the toilet, filling and emptying up every 3 minutes. It just empties the container, the reservoir of water. And they tell her, what's the story? She says, no, it's been going on like this for years. I like it actually, because when I want to fall asleep, I open the door and the noise of water makes me fall asleep much easier. So of course, she asked them to fix the leak, and it was done within the next day. And you know, the funny thing about this, that a month later, the property utility guy, the person in charge of the infrastructure maintenance, he gets a call from the utility company. They say, we think that something's wrong with your water. Say, what's the story? They tell him, you know, your water bill, you know, the reading, we just took it, they take it once a month or once in 2 months, has gone down so dramatically, something's wrong. You probably bypassed the pipe, or you did some changes, something's wrong at your site. Said, well, actually, that's absolutely incorrect. Well, the thing is that we just installed a sub-metering system that allows us to collect information. And already in the first month, we've detected 2 or 3 events of leaks and water loss like this. They said, we want to come and see this. They came over there, they didn't believe this. And you know, after that, they were asking questions about how they can install a system like that. So as an anecdote, it just emphasizes how small systems like this might change big things for the utilities. And we're now involved in many projects also with the utility companies around the world. And things like this have a significant impact. We've been installing systems in Arab towns such as Al-Fahim, Rahat, places that, you know, they didn't have electricity a few years ago. And now these cities are billing their customers and providing them with alerts and warnings when they have leaks within their houses, not to mention the fact that they can also detect fraud and suspected theft and all kinds of other things that the system can give them. So these were just a few examples of things that we're doing now with technology involved with water. And we're now involved not only in RF communications, but also cellular devices. So the IoT of the water utilities is becoming a very, very exciting place. And I think that the rest of the people on the panel will be glad to add some additional information about other technologies that are related to water.
Yeah. Clive or Jacob, do you want to add to new water technologies that you're involved in?
Sure. I mean, it's inspiring to hear what you're explaining about your IoT system. And, you know, for someone like me, it makes me think, how do you even get started in a business like that? And it brings to attention, for example, a new technology that Israel is getting involved with. Mekorot just published a new tender for floating solar systems on their water reservoirs, which is something that is a new trend going on around the world, especially in Asia. I know there are 20 of these systems in the United States. And the idea is that they put solar panels that are frequently on rooftops on the water reservoir. And there are certain benefits that come from this, such as reduced evaporation of water, which is, of course, a precious resource. In addition, there's reduced algae growth in the water. And also, there is a more efficient energy generation because the water underneath the solar panels keeps the solar panels cool, allowing them to be at an optimal temperature. So this just gets me thinking on how does a country, you know, which just was born 70 years ago, start to become a powerhouse in so many different sectors, such as IoT, which Yaroom, you've explained so well. And here's another technology that Israel is just getting started in, and who knows where we could be in 10 years with regards to the floating solar system ecosystem.
Great. Clive, you want to add in?
I can say a few words as well on technology. I think one of the great achievements of Israeli water management, which has huge global significance in dealing with global water scarcity, is it's not just technology, it's the Israeli mindset. Way back in the 1970s, Israeli farmers were already aware that the freshwater resources in Israel were not going to be sufficient for agriculture. Agriculture is the world's largest sector in terms of water demand. Most countries consume anywhere from 70 to 90% of their water just to grow food. So the connection with water and food and the whole concept of food security is an essential part of how to think about and manage water. And Israelis have understood this for decades now. The fact that we are producing, that one of our most agriculturally productive areas is the desert region, where annual rainfall can be less than 100 millimeters per year, is revolutionary. And one of the reasons why we've been able to do this is because we understand the value of water, all types of water. And what I'm relating to here specifically is wastewater or sewage. The fact that Israel is the world leader in wastewater treatment and recycling for irrigation has huge consequences for the rest of the world, where the treatment of wastewater and the recycling of wastewater in agriculture is very, very low. Israel is treating up to 90% of its sewage and reusing at least 80% of that in agriculture. And what that has allowed Israel to do is to become less and less dependent on freshwater supplies and able to become actually more food secure over time, even with the fact that natural water resources, mostly due to climate change, are declining and becoming less and less predictable. And this is just a brief segue into a technology that I'm involved in, which is to provide wastewater treatment and recycling services to developing communities around the world that lack access to large-scale sewage infrastructure. So we are developing here in Israel on-site wastewater treatment and reuse, specifically for small-scale farming communities around the world. This is a technology that has huge significance for Africa, for example, and India, Latin America, where wastewater access to infrastructure to treat wastewater is limiting. So the whole idea of rethinking or thinking completely differently about the fact that sewage is not something that should just be thrown away and discharged because it's a source of pollution, but Israel actually has turned that whole idea on its head and said, no, sewage actually is a valuable source of water once we can treat it and put it back into production. And today, Israel no longer is at the mercy of drought or climate change in terms of its food security.
That's great. Dr. Lipshin, I wanted to just add to what you're saying as well. In your leadership at the Arava Institute, you meet and educate a student base that is truly international. And we've discussed some of the emerging technologies in the last question and what you added to. But referring to the clip from the Sustainable Nation that we saw, what is the impact you are seeing related to relationships with other countries that you touched upon and with your student base? And then add to that regards to what's happening with COVID-19 and new emerging strains.
Thanks, Bernard. So at the Arava Institute, we are educating the next generation of environmental leaders, not just in Israel, but in the region. We bring to our campus in the southern Arava, which is one of the most driest areas of the country, if not the world, Israelis, Jordanians, Palestinians, students from all around the world in an international program in environmental studies. And what draws these students to come to Israel is firstly to be exposed to the level of innovation that Israel brings to solving environmental problems, water, of course, being one of them, but not just water, energy, waste management, and other environmental challenges, but also the understanding that solving environmental problems requires cooperation. And the only way to resolve those problems is to work together. And this is especially true in the case of Israel and the surrounding countries. Israel is a very small country, as we all, I think, know on this webinar. And all of Israel's water resources originate from outside of its borders. And so cooperation is an essential means to manage these resources effectively and sustainably. And this is what we teach at the Arava Institute, that the environment is a platform, it's a foundation to build cooperation and coexistence. Our students study together, they live together, and they gain a deep appreciation about the importance of understanding that we all, drink the same water and we breathe the same air. And so this is our mission at the Institute, and we actualize that mission through our program and through our students, many of whom become leaders in their own communities once they return from their time at the Institute. On average, we can have anywhere from 50 to 60 students per semester, and at least 1/3 of those students are Arabic speakers, either Palestinians or Jordanians. And we are now actively exploring students coming from the UAE, from Bahrain, from Morocco, all of the countries that are now rapidly normalizing relations with Israel. Sudan, of course, is also an option. And this just widens the community and the ability to engage on issues that are common to us all. I think the other question, Bernard, was on COVID, or did I forget something else? COVID? Okay. Yeah. No, okay. So in terms of COVID, there's a strong relationship between how to manage the pandemic and water. Firstly, sanitation and hygiene are one of the main tools that we have to protect ourselves from infection, as we all know. Washing our hands frequently is a practice that hopefully many of us have now internalized as a means to keep us safe from infection. But there's a growing realization that the virus can be identified in wastewater. So this is relating also to wastewater from what I said earlier. And basically, what do I mean? If you are infected with the virus, whether you are symptomatic or asymptomatic, you will shed the virus in your feces, and that will then enter into the wastewater stream. So what we are doing at the Arava Institute, in cooperation with Ben Gurion University of the Negev, with support of the government, most specifically, of course, the Ministry of Health, is to monitor the concentrations of virus in the wastewater in Israel as a means to pre-screen where future outbreaks will occur, as a tool to better manage infection rates and the virus. And we are doing this work not only in Israel, but we're also doing it with our Palestinian colleagues in the West Bank, because, of course, we need to ensure that not only are Israelis going to be able to overcome the virus, but our neighbors as well. And so this is just another example of cooperation where there's a common interest in managing our resources. And so it's quite an exciting project to be a part of. And just this afternoon, before this webinar, I had a call with my Palestinian colleagues on how we're going to map out the sites where we will be monitoring for the virus in the West Bank. And the level of enthusiasm from the Palestinians to work with us, specifically because Israel has the ability, the laboratories at Ben Gurion University to do the appropriate analysis that is required for this study. So this whole idea is what is now being termed wastewater epidemiology. And we're very excited to be a part of it. And of course, to lend our expertise, not only within Israel, but in a way to assist our neighbors in the Palestinian Authority as well.
Wow, that's amazing. Yaroom or Jacob, do you want to add anything to what we just said? If not, I wanted to ask Yaroom a question about current threats to Israel related to water. What do you see, or what do you see also, Jacob, that threatens Israel? We'll talk about the negative first, then we'll switch it over to a positive about what Clive just mentioned a second ago about getting along with and creating relationships with some of our adversaries or the greater Middle East to do good with water. But Yaroom, you can start.
I mean, I think that wars have always been about territories or religion, but last but not least also about water. if not the main reason, but always in the background. And Israel's relationship with its neighbors is not very much different than that. I think Israel has had water-related conflicts with Palestinians, with Jordan, with Syria, and with Lebanon. And I think since the Six-Day War, water has become a central matter of dispute in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I think this is due both to political issues as well as maybe the shortage of water, which is common everywhere, but here in Israel, it's always been a main issue. I think the problem is worsening as a result of the decrease of water reserves caused by the pollution and climate changes. Two different things that are happening at the same time that are making the situation much, much more difficult. And together with the rising demand, maybe that's a third factor. So not only the decrease of water and the climate changes and the pollution, but more and more people need the same. I mean, everyone wants water. And usually, I mean, nowadays people use much more water than they used in the past. So if you take all those factors together, especially if we look at the occupied Palestinian territories or Gaza Strip, water is a major issue. I think that the core conflict lies in the asymmetrical distribution of the region's already scarce water resources, which are controlled in many cases by Israel, or the opposite. They're in Palestinian areas, but they feed the Israeli aquifer. So the borders or the lines between the different authorities really are not that strong because water flows underneath the ground and is used at both sides. And if someone contaminates the water at one side of the country, it damages or it affects the water, the wells on the other side of the country. So it really is a major issue. I think that it's not only between Israel and the Palestinians. Just recently, Lebanon has started a construction project in the southern Lebanon, just close to the town of Metula. Israel is concerned that this reservoir is going to be, I think it's on the Al-Wazani River, that it will deplete Israel's water supply, or at least I think 30% of the water flowing into the Jordan River and then into the Kinneret comes from this source of water that comes from snow that melts from the Lebanon mountains. And on the other hand, Lebanon is claiming that this project is just for agricultural purposes, and Lebanon plans to benefit, from its rights to use the water in its area. So it just shows you that water could be a major issue of conflict. At the same time, I think that water is also in the, in the middle or in the center of any peace agreements or settlements. Just if you look at the Israeli-Jordanian peace agreement, it includes some important understandings between the two countries with regards to using the Jordan River for agriculture, the Naharaim Dam, and all kinds of other aspects that relate to how the countries can live side by side in peace while using water for both countries' benefits. So these are just, I think, a few examples that relate to how water is always one of the most sensitive issues influencing Israel's relationship with its neighbors. So I'm sure Clive has a lot more examples to give about things going on in Gaza Strip recently in the past few years. It's very difficult. On the other hand, it's like anything in business. It's an opportunity and a threat. Depends how you manage the situation.
Right, right. Clive, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think Yaron did an excellent job in explaining a very complicated issue, but the bottom line is correct. At the end of the day, water is fundamental for life, and it's simply not a resource worth fighting over. That's a zero-sum game. And the example of Israel and Jordan, I think, is a really good one. The level of cooperation between the two countries on water resource management is not just an amazing thing that has really helped keep the peace, even though there's been many ups and downs between Israel and Jordan over the years, but there's been also some amazing creativity as well. One example that was agreed to in the treaty that goes back now to the treaty was signed in 1994 is one of Jordan. Jordan is the fourth water scarce country in the world. And one of the problems that Jordan faces is lack of storage capacity, lack of reservoirs. And so one of the aspects of the treaty with Israel is that actually, and I don't know how many people are aware, but Jordan actually uses the Kinneret. The Sea of Galilee, the Kinneret, is Israel's surface water reservoir, managed as a reservoir, although it's a natural lake. And under the treaty, Israel pumps water from the Yarmouk River, which feeds into the Jordan River, into the Kinneret, and then sends that water back to Jordan in the summertime. So they pump the water in the winter when there's a relatively high level of flow because of rain, and then they return that water to Jordan in the summer. And what this means is that Jordan is actually benefiting from Israel's water infrastructure. And this has had a huge benefit to Jordan trying to overcome some of its water management issues. And so that's just one example. And then I'll just briefly touch on Gaza again, and also relating what Yaron mentioned, the company Watergen. We are working with Watergen and the Israeli authorities to bring water to Gaza. Gaza is also an extremely water scarce region, mostly because of huge overpumping of their aquifer. And so they've created massive salinity in the aquifer to the point that many places simply do not have water that is safe to drink. And so together with Watergen, we have successfully imported their technology into Gaza. And we now have Israeli technology providing clean water to a hospital in Gaza, as well as to a community in the south of Gaza. And what is important here is that this was done openly, transparently. The Gazans understand and appreciate when technology is good, look to Israel. So with all the problems we have with Gaza, with the Hamas government in Gaza, this project went forward with everybody's blessing. And following up to that, we have now just recently brought into Gaza the first decentralized wastewater treatment facility for a small town of, I think, around 10,000 people. So they will be able to now treat their sewage and reuse of irrigation, just like what is happening in Israel. So, unfortunately, the headlines always want to, talk about how bad things are. But there's a lot of really, really good things happening. And a lot of that is because people understand at the end of the day, much can be achieved when we cooperate, and water really does bring people together.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. Anybody listening, of the hundreds of participants in this webinar about what Israel is trying to do for Gaza, for the Palestinians, it doesn't get enough press. It doesn't get enough say in the media. Israel is thought of as a light into the nations, tikkun olam. Israel tries to do and succeeds at doing a lot of good things, especially for its neighbors. So I do want to add that. But I do also want to get Jacob from the Israel Economic Mission to add to that, and maybe give your presentation about water from the Israel Economic Mission statement.
Sure. Would you like me to go ahead and give my short presentation now?
Yeah, I think so. Paul, if you cue it up, or Jacob.
I got it.
Okay.
I think that's a good idea. While I set that up, I just wanted to mention how, in addition to the physical security, cybersecurity is also an area of expertise of Israel, which is very important for critical infrastructure like water. Are you guys seeing the correct screen or the presenter screen right now?
I see the presenter screen, I believe, from Paul.
No, I see the right screen. It's okay.
No,
you're on the presentation. It's okay.
Okay. So I'll just give a brief overview. I mean, our panelists have spoken really to a lot of this, which is has a lot to do with Israel being a desert, and we wouldn't expect to see Israel be a powerhouse in the water industry, but despite being 60% desert and its population growing about 8 times in the last 70 years, Israel has exported water to its neighbors. And that's been pretty miraculous, also taking into account that the agricultural output of Israel has also increased by 6 times. And as we know, a fruit like a tomato is over 90% water. So how has this happened? How did Israel become a powerhouse in the water sector? And our panelists have spoken very eloquently about it. And I'll just highlight some of the kind of industry stakeholders that have had a positive result here. Includes the society overall, which is highly educated, from many kibbutzes to the government, which has the water authority, the Mekorot, which is the national water company in charge of distribution of water, and includes 12,000 kilometers of pipelines, and also to a strong private sector partnership, which includes institutions like the Hutchinson Kinroth Water Incubator, venture capital funds, and many multinational companies. And the result, as we've highlighted in this talk, has been 86% of wastewater is reused, which is leading the world. We also mentioned the potential to put solar panels on some of these water reservoirs, which is a new initiative. 80% of household and industrial water is derived from desalination, which is amazing to believe that in 15 years, Israel has created 5 different desalination plants, which, as you can see, has changed the distribution of water resource source over the last 20 years. And Israel is building 3 more desalination facilities. The 6th one will be the largest one in the world. And what's very interesting is that it will result in the Sea of Galilee actually taking water from the desalination plants instead of being a net contributor of water to Israel. So what's interesting is that we're seeing nature becoming a consumer of water from the desalination facilities, not just a net contributor. And as we've highlighted, the Israel water ecosystem touches on many different industries, and our role here at the Israel Economic Mission is to help match the Israeli ecosystem, not just in the water sector, but across many different sectors, to foreign stakeholders all over the world. So feel welcome to reach out, and we will be pleased to help provide scouting, research, and matchmaking. We're one of 44 offices. I'm here in New York, but there are 44 offices around the world. So wherever you are, we're able to assist you, and we look forward to being in touch.
Jacob, thank you. Great presentation. As a real good summary to bring everything together. Before I hand it back to Paul to take questions from the audience, I'd like to thank all of those who partnered and contributed to our symposium and webinar series. We hope you enjoyed this webinar. It's not over. We are going to take questions. But I just wanted to add, it's been said that one of our purposes as Jews, as I mentioned, is to repair the world, tikkun olam. It's apparent that the breakthrough technologies in the area of clean water and proper water utilization has had a huge impact on the economy, the environment of all countries. Israel, as we said, is a model for that. And Prime Minister Begin would be proud of our incredible achievements coming out. So Paul, I'm going to hand it back over to you to take some questions from the audience and other discussion points that people are bringing up.
Great. Thank you very much, Bernard, and thank you to all of the panel for some fascinating insights from your various perspectives and areas of expertise. So we have a few questions and we have a bit of time, about 10 minutes or so. There was a question specifically about California, which I know has suffered from serious drought. And I believe Israel has been involved in helping California, but someone will maybe confirm that or correct me in that. But the question specifically says, with the tremendous issues related to water reclamation in California, at the same time as there is water shortage, why aren't Israeli companies more involved in solving these issues? Is that?
I can maybe jump in to begin. I'm sure Yoram and Jacob can comment as well, but Israeli companies are involved in California, and one example is IDE. IDE is one of Israel's largest desalination companies with a global reach. The first large-scale seawater desalination plant for Southern California in Carlsbad near San Diego was built in partnership with IDE and of course with California partners as well. And so a desalination technology from Israel is already operational and up and running in California. Another Israeli innovation that we haven't mentioned, which probably was the progenitor of Israeli water tech going back decades now, of course, is drip irrigation, spearheaded by the Israeli company Netafim. Drip irrigation is now, of course, widely accepted throughout the world, including in California, which is one of the most, if not the most important agricultural centers for produce for the American market. And many farmers throughout California are rapidly adopting drip irrigation because of the growing water scarcity in California. And there's a growing realization at the policy level in California, whether it's from the governor or the various state authorities and counties in California, that the future for California in some respects is similar to what Israel has done already, which is desalination for domestic water supply. So Israel really, there are many Californians that are looking to Israel as a model because California is rapidly running out of its fresh water supplies. And by the way, California is also dealing with huge regional difficulties with sharing water, specifically the Colorado water basin, which it has to share with other states in the United States and also with Mexico in the south. So there's a lot that Israel can contribute, and the Carlsbad desalination plant is just one example.
Great. Does anyone else want to comment on that question before I go to another question?
I think that there are also quite a few Israeli companies involved in metering applications in California. Things are changing there with regards to metering. In the past, people would consume water, and just today it's so unique, the situation, that people are required not to irrigate their grass, their lawns, and other things. So water technologies related to monitoring are becoming, I think, something very common in California. Not only Israeli companies, but Israeli technology is also being demonstrated there.
Great, thank you. There have actually been a few questions relating to the Dead Sea. So I'm going to ask them together, and if any of you want to chime in on those, that would be great. One relates to the Kidron Stream. Someone asked about the polluted Kidron Stream, which drains into the Dead Sea and has been the subject of much concern. Are there any technologies on the horizon to help ameliorate that problem? Another question is about what's the chance that we will again allow water to flow from the Kinneret down the Jordan to the Dead Sea, both to rehabilitate the Jordan and to help with the Dead Sea water level. And finally, there's a question about any progress on the Red to Dead Sea project. Any comment on any of those? Kidron Stream, water flowing from the Kinneret, and Red to Dead Sea.
I can jump in on some of that, if you allow me. So firstly, on the Kidron is a very challenging issue because the source of wastewater flowing down the Kidron is coming from East Jerusalem and from Palestinian towns and villages surrounding the city. And so what's happening is that sewage is not being treated. and is being channeled via the Kidron, finding its way eventually to the Dead Sea. It's a challenging issue, not because we don't have the technology to treat the sewage, but it goes back to what we were saying earlier with how to develop some of the cooperative structures with the Palestinian Authority on this issue. The good news is that there is an agreement between Israel and the Palestinians on a wastewater treatment facility that is actually has been approved to treat a percentage of that wastewater, therefore preventing it from being discharged into the Kidron. And then that wastewater will be used for irrigation for both Palestinian and Israeli farmers in the area between Jerusalem and the Dead Sea. In terms of water flowing from the Jordan to the Dead Sea, the reason the Dead Sea is shrinking at quite an alarming rate of over 1 meter a year is because there's no longer water flowing down from the Jordan. And that is because the Sea of Galilee is managed as a reservoir, as we mentioned earlier. And so water is controlled in the lake by a dam at the southern part of the Kinneret. In my opinion, the chances of fresh water returning to the Jordan River and then to the Dead Sea is probably very low because, again, of the importance of fresh water for the region, specifically for Jordan. However, I think Yaron touched on this, no, I think Jacob touched on this. There is a plan to build a desalination facility in the north of the country, near somewhere between Akko and Haifa, and to send some of that water to the Kinneret. Firstly, to help balance the water levels of the Kinneret, but secondly, to ensure enough water can be sent to Jordan according to the peace treaty. And that additional water might also help us to return some of the water to the Jordan River. It's debatable whether that water will be enough to help the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is losing around 800 million cubic meters of water per year due to evaporative losses. And to put that number in perspective, Israel consumes per year about 2 billion cubic meters of water per year. So it's about 40% of Israel's annual water budget that is being lost annually to the Dead Sea. And that brings me to the Red Sea Dead Sea project, which was the final part of the question. I think that's the best option to save the Dead Sea. And it's a great example of technology and political cooperation between Israel and Jordan, and with the Palestinians and with the international community. So I really hope that the Red Sea Dead Sea project will see the light of day, because I think it's the best option to save the Dead Sea, and also it will provide the needed water for additional needed water for Jordan as well. Okay, there were a lot of other questions. There were also some technical questions, which I know Yaron was valiantly trying to answer during the course, where his expertise was particularly useful. I'm going to ask our panelists if they're willing to write their email addresses into the chat box. That way, our participants can contact them directly if that's okay with them. I know that I think Bernard already wrote his earlier, but you can find it if you scroll up, or he'll write it again. But I think that would be helpful for everyone. I'll maybe ask one last couple of questions which relate to Gaza. So one person asked about whether there's a wastewater problem from Gaza, and someone else asked about the aquifer, and if anything is being done to help save the aquifer that is being overused in Gaza, and are there partners in Gaza who would work with Israelis on this? Because as the questioner suggests, that the damage might also affect Israel. I can comment, but I wonder if Yaron or Jacob would like to say something first. Please go ahead. Okay, so there's a huge wastewater problem in Gaza. And actually the reason why we have a problem in Gaza is not so much because of the lack of wastewater technologies. There are 3 large wastewater treatment facilities in Gaza, one in the north, and one in the center, and one in the south. The problem is energy. There's not enough energy entering Gaza to power those facilities. And so a lot of the sewage is simply discharged into the Mediterranean. The reason there's no energy is because there, unfortunately, is not an agreement between Israel and the authority in Gaza, which is Hamas, for a high tension power line needs to be brought into Gaza. I know that the international community, the US, the World Bank, have been very active working to try to get this to get the electricity into Gaza. But it's not a simple issue. It's very much in Israel's interest to improve wastewater infrastructure in Gaza, because when that wastewater is discharged into the Mediterranean in Gaza, it flows northward into Israel. And this actually can impact Israel's desalination facility in Ashkelon, which is only a few kilometers north of Gaza. So there's a lot of interest on the Israeli side to improve the wastewater infrastructure in Gaza, which of course improves Gaza, improves the quality of life for the residents of Gaza, and it's definitely in Israel's interest as well. In terms of the aquifer is heavily overpumped in Gaza. This is the part of the coastal aquifer system, which Israel also uses. But that's more of a localized issue. There isn't much impact to Israel's water resources in the overpumping in the Gaza aquifer. But the solution there is desalination for Gaza. And again, I know that there's been many discussions on bringing in large-scale desalination into Gaza. And the only way to make this happen is, I think, to have a very positive role of the international community. Turkey has offered to bring in actually a reconfigured oil tanker to have an offshore desalination facility helping Gaza meet its water needs. And Israel is very keen to make this happen. But this is really moving us into a level of international politics that might be slightly beyond this webinar. But so I think I'll stop at that point.
Okay, thank you very much, Clive. Okay, I think unless anyone else has any closing remarks, we will conclude there. Bernard, is that okay with you?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so thank you very much to Bernard Haston, to Yaron Locher, to Dr. Clive Lipshin, and to Jacob Asiri. I want to ask everyone to keep us in mind for the future webinars that we're doing. As I said, we have one in 2 weeks' time as part of this series looking at the so-called Begin Doctrine, which was essentially from Menachem Begin's decision to destroy Iraq's nuclear reactor in 1981, and was then subsequently employed again in 2007 when Israel bombed Syria's secret nuclear facility. We're going to have 2 great speakers for that event in a couple of weeks. And I also want to ask you to email me. I've put my email address down there, paulg@begincenter.org.il. I'm in the chat box as well. If you want to be on my mailing list, where you'll not only get information about the future webinars in this series, but also the regular events we do in English here at the Begin Center, including one next week, which may be of interest particularly to Americans on this meeting, where we're looking at the US-Israel relationship with the new American administration, and we'll have former Israeli Consul General from New York, Danny Dayan, and David Mukovsky of the Washington Institute. And I've included a link to register for that event in the chat under my email address. So click on that and register. So thank you again to all our panelists. Thank you everyone for attending. It's really been fascinating and educational, and we all have a much better idea now of exactly of the details of this amazing miracle happening here in the Jewish state around water and the technological advances of this country. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good evening.